Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
The market on Crossroads Station was a hell of rust, steam, and desperation. The cavernous chamber, once a gleaming hub of interstellar commerce, had devolved into a labyrinth of makeshift stalls and desperate vendors. Corroded pipes snaked along the ceiling, occasionally releasing hissing jets of scalding vapor that carried the acrid stench of burnt circuitry and industrial lubricant. The ambient noise was a discordant symphony, a dozen alien languages haggling over prices, the mechanical whine of overworked servo motors from loading droids, a child's thin wail from somewhere in the crowd, and the constant grating loop of cheap advertisements blaring from crackling speakers. Premium protein, lab-grown, no sentient DNA guaranteed, squawked an automated vendor as Jax passed. From the shadows of his workshop, Jax watched two scavengers, hollow-eyed men in patchwork environmental suits, square off over a salvaged power cell. Their shouting attracted the attention of a syndicate patrol. Three bored guards in mismatched armor who sauntered over, shock batons swinging casually at their sides. The guards didn't bother asking questions. They simply waded in, batons crackling with electric blue energy. One scavenger went down immediately, curling into a protective ball. The other tried to run, clutching the power cell to his chest like a precious infant. A baton to the back of his knees dropped him. The lead guard took the power cell, examined it with theatrical interest, then pocketed it. Dispute resolved, he announced to no one in particular, and the patrol moved on. Jax's calloused fingers absently tinkered with a faulty power converter as he observed. His face, weathered beyond his years, remained impassive, but his eyes, sharp and observant, missed nothing. The heavy scarring along his forearms told stories he never spoke aloud. Histories buried deeper than the station's core reactors. He was just trying to keep his head down, to disappear into the background radiation of this forsaken outpost. The crowd's usual chaotic rhythm suddenly shifted, like prey animals sensing a predator. Bodies parted, creating a reluctant pathway through the heart of the market. Jax's hands stilled on his work. Kyle had arrived. The Gladiator moved with the confidence of a man who owned everything his gaze fell upon. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, his massive frame was enhanced by a combat-grade exoskeleton that whirred and clicked with each movement, hydraulic pistons hissing as they amplified his already considerable strength. The right side of his face was scarred and partially reconstructed with grafted synthetic skin, a red targeting lens fitted where his natural eye had once been. He was the Syndicate's enforcer on this station, and today was collection day. Behind him trailed his 12 wives, a silent, diverse entourage of women from a dozen different worlds. They moved in perfect unison, their faces carefully blank, their bodies adorned in fine fabrics that stood out like rare jewels amid the station's drabness. They were his property, a living, breathing symbol of his power. "Payments due," Kyle announced, his voice a mechanically enhanced rumble that cut through the market's ambient noise. 15% this cycle. Syndicate's been generous. Frightened vendors scrambled to produce credit chips, carefully saved over weeks of meager profits. Those who couldn't pay tried to make themselves invisible, shrinking into the shadows of their stalls. An old woman, her spine curved from decades tending to hydroponic gardens, fumbled nervously with a crate of fragile glass flasks containing rare growth enzymes. Her trembling hands betrayed her, and the crate slipped from her grasp. The sound of shattering glass was like a gunshot in the suddenly silent market. Kyle moved toward her with deliberate slowness. The crowd around them dissolved, nobody wanting to be caught in the inevitable blast radius of his anger. The old woman's weathered face went slack with terror as the Gladiator towered over her. "These flasks," Kale said, his voice unnervingly soft as he crouched to pick up a surviving container, examining it in the light, "are worth more than your life, Mother." The word mother slid from his lips like venom. "You understand that, don't you? You wouldn't want me to demonstrate the comparison." The old woman's lips trembled as she tried to form words, any words that might save her. "Please, I can—" Kale's roar of anger cut through the market's din, causing nearby vendors to flinch and retreat. "Clumsy hag," he snarled, pushing past a cowering customer to tower over the terrified woman. "That's coming out of your payment. With interest." He raised his fist, encased in a bulky, sparking power gauntlet that hummed with barely contained energy. The old woman's face drained of color as she raised gnarled hands in a futile gesture of protection. Jax moved. He didn't intend to, but his body acted before his mind could veto the decision. One moment he was in his workshop doorway, the next he stood between the gladiator and the terrified woman. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't assume a fighting stance. He simply pointed at Kel's weapon. "You have a pressure feedback loop in that gauntlet," Jax said, his voice calm and level, cutting through the tension like a precision blade. "The energy recyclers are misaligned. One more high-impact strike, and your hand will atomize." The market fell silent. Even the constant background hiss of the station's environmental systems seemed to hold its breath. Kale's organic eye narrowed as he studied Jax's face, searching for any sign of deception. Then he threw his head back and laughed, a grating sound that set teeth on edge. "Listen to the grease monkey," he bellowed, scanning the crowd to ensure they appreciated his mockery. "The little man thinks he knows weapons." He turned his attention back to the old woman, who had used the distraction to gather what unbroken flasks remained. With deliberate slowness, Kale swung at her. Jax didn't move. He just watched. The gauntlet connected not with the woman, but with the metal stanchion beside her. For a split second it glowed a furious red, energy cascading through failing containment fields. Then with a deafening crack, it exploded. The blast knocked Kale backward, leaving him staring in disbelief at the mangled, smoking ruin where his augmented hand had been moments before. His scream, part rage, part agony, echoed through the market. You did this," he howled at Jax, clutching his ruined arm to his chest. "I'll have your head for this." But Jax wasn't looking at Kyle. His attention had shifted to the 12 women. Their faces, usually masks of cold obedience, were frozen in shock. Some had instinctively stepped back. Others remained perfectly still, their training overriding their surprise. One of them, a blue-skinned woman with the precise, sharp features of a navigator, met his gaze. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, held not just shock, but calculation. A flicker of something dangerous. A flicker of hope. That flicker haunted Jax as he retreated to his workshop, closing the reinforced door behind him. He had stepped out of the shadows. He had made himself visible. And on Crossroads Station, visibility was often a prelude to extinction. She found him 3 hours later. His workshop was a cluttered sanctuary of spare parts and diagnostic screens, illuminated by the cool blue glow of holographic schematics. The air smelled of machine oil and ozone, a comforting scent to those who understood the language of mechanical things. The blue-skinned woman moved with a silent grace that was at odds with the station's brutalist design. She navigated the maze of equipment without disturbing a single component, stopping just inside the doorway. "My name is Lyra," she said, her voice a low, melodic hum that seemed to vibrate at a frequency just beyond normal hearing. I was Kale's chief navigator." Jax didn't stop his work, his hands steady as he recalibrated a faulty plasma injector. He didn't look up, but the slight tension in his shoulders betrayed his awareness of the danger she potentially represented. "And I'm the man who broke your master's favorite toy," he replied, his voice deliberately neutral. "I'd stay clear if I were you. His temper won't have improved." "He is not our master," Lyra said, her voice tight with a lifetime of suppressed fury. Her hands, delicate but strong, curled into fists at her sides. "And those are not his wives." Now Jax did look up, his dark eyes meeting her stormy ones. "We are his assets," she continued, each word precise and carefully chosen. 12 specialists, a pilot, a cryptographer, a strategist, a xenobotanist, a surgeon, a weapons expert, a mechanic, a hacker, a chemist, a tracker, an engineer, and myself, a navigator. Each of us the best in our field. She moved closer, lowering her voice. Ilara, our strategist, surrendered voluntarily to save her homeworld from syndicate sabotage. Now she plans raids against civilian settlements. May, the xenobotanist, could grow gardens on barren asteroids. Instead, she cultivates poisonous flora for Kale's interrogation sessions. Her fingers traced an invisible pattern on the workbench. Zia, our pilot, was an orbital racing champion. Her family was killed when she refused to throw a championship match for syndicate betting profits. Only her younger brother survives, held in a labor camp. Nara could disassemble and reassemble any weapon in the sector blindfolded. Now she maintains the tools of our oppression. She looked up, her eyes fierce. Each of us acquired through different means. Some purchased, some blackmailed, some kidnapped. And each of us has a family held as collateral by the syndicate he serves. She moved closer, her movements fluid yet restrained, like a dancer who had been taught to minimize her presence. We are his gilded cage, ornaments with practical value. Jack saw another flash cross her face. Ilara, gray-haired and dignified, standing before a planetary defense council. Surrender yourself as a strategic asset, or we release the bioweapon. The deliberate calculation in her eyes as she removed her counselor's insignia and stepped forward. Zia in a racing jumpsuit, her hands steady on controls as she executed an impossible maneuver to win a championship. Then the message. Her family's transport had experienced technical difficulties, unless she came willingly. Nara demonstrating weapon techniques to military cadets, then discovering every one of her students had been executed after a training accident she was being framed for. A syndicate representative offering the only way out. The plasma injector in Jax's hands went still. He looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time beyond her exotic appearance. He saw the cold resolve in her eyes, the same resolve he'd seen in the faces of soldiers sent on suicide missions. He saw himself. "Why me?" he asked, setting the injector aside. "Because you didn't defeat him with strength," Lyra replied, her gaze traveling over the modest workshop. "You defeated him with knowledge. You saw a flaw in his power. We need you to help us find the flaw in his control." Jax turned away, moving to a cluttered workbench, where he began organizing tools that didn't need organizing. The ghosts of his past swirled in the cramped workshop. As his eyes traced the station schematics floating in the holographic display, the blue lines of ventilation shafts suddenly morphed in his mind, becoming the emergency systems of that colony. Colonial Outpost 47. He could still hear them. The screams fading into whimpers as the atmospheric processors were remotely disabled. A regrettable strategic necessity, Command had called it. The outpost had witnessed a syndicate weapons test. 50,000 civilians. Men, women, children. "Sir, they're civilians," his second-in-command had argued when the orders came through. "They're a security risk," the admiral had replied, his face impassive on the comm screen. "Proceed with atmospheric lockdown." Jax's hand trembled now as it had then. He remembered the weight of his officer's sidearm as he'd drawn it, pointing it not at the colony controls, but at his own communications officer. "Send an evacuation alert," he'd ordered instead. The memory of klaxons, of his crew's faces, shock, then resolve as they committed mutiny alongside him. The colony had been partially evacuated when Command's override protocols activated. The screams from the remaining colonists had come through on open channels as Jax and his crew fought to regain control. Too late. Always too late. The faces of the crew he had refused to condemn, even as it meant condemning himself to a life in the shadows, rose before him. All dead now, hunted down by military intelligence, while he alone had escaped. He had run from that fight. He couldn't run from this one. "Their lives are tied to your service," Jax stated, understanding the brutal math of the situation. "If you rebel, they die." "Which is why we cannot fail," Lyra said, stepping closer until she stood directly across the workbench from him. The dim light caught the subtle iridescence of her skin, revealing patterns like star charts mapped across her features. "Tell me, mechanic, can you break a cage as easily as you broke that gauntlet?" Jax looked down at his hands, scarred and stained with the evidence of 1,000 repairs. Hands that had once followed orders without question, then had refused an order at terrible cost. Hands that had been trying to atone ever since. "A cage," he said finally, "is just another kind of machine, and every machine has its breaking point." Their rebellion began not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, untraceable glitches. A shipment of weapons Kale was expecting for the Syndicate was mysteriously rerouted to a quarantine sector due to a navigational error Lyra had secretly fed into the system. The high-frequency comms he used to contact his masters were suddenly plagued by phantom static. A masterpiece of signal interference from Anya, the cryptographer with eyes the color of burnished gold and fingers that danced across control panels with hypnotic precision. She was the quietest of the 12, her voice rarely rising above a whisper, yet she radiated an intensity that made others instinctively lean closer when she spoke. "Encryption is poetry," she told Jax once, as her fingers traced complex patterns on a stolen datapad. It's about finding the perfect balance between complexity and elegance. Her eyes, normally downcast, had met his with unexpected fierceness. The syndicate holds my sister. She was a prodigy, 18 years old and already breaking ciphers the military couldn't crack. They took her first, then me when I tried to find her. When she worked, Anya would hum sequences of numbers under her breath, a habit she claimed helped her visualize algorithmic patterns. The other women found it eerie, but Jax recognized it for what it was. A mantra, a promise to herself that the numbers would someday add up to freedom. Kale's personal fighter sputtered out during a routine diagnostic, its engine flooded by a fuel mixture subtly altered by Zia, the pilot whose body bore the surgical scars of forced augmentation to improve her reflexes. The security protocols on his private quarters mysteriously reset every third cycle, forcing him to sleep in his armor. Jax was the conductor of this silent orchestra of sabotage. The women would bring him information, schematics, security protocols, snippets stolen during moments when Kale's attention wavered. In his workshop, hunched over holographic displays that illuminated their determined faces in ethereal blue light, he would find the vulnerabilities. He taught them how to create chain reactions, how one small, overlooked component could bring a complex system to a halt. One night, Lyra arrived at his workshop later than usual. Without a word, she placed a small metallic component on his workbench. A quantum phase regulator, rare and obviously stolen from Kale's private supplies. It was exactly the part Jax needed to complete the signal disruptor he'd been struggling to build with substandard components. He looked at the part, then at her. This wasn't just a contribution to their plan, it was a test. Would he accept this stolen piece without question? Would he become complicit in their rebellion beyond mere advice? Jax picked up the regulator, examining it in the light. Then without comment, he integrated it into his device. The disruptor hummed to life, its indicators glowing a steady green. Power isn't about strength, he told them one night, as they gathered in the hidden crawl space beneath his workshop. It's about dependencies. Find what the system depends on, and you control the system. He gestured to a holographic schematic of the station. Kale is strong because he has you. The syndicate is strong because it has Kale. We won't break the walls. We'll remove one brick from the foundation, and they'll collapse under their own weight. Between the planning sessions, a fragile trust formed between Jax and Lyra. They shared synthesized protein bars in the quiet hum of the workshop, exchanging fragments of their past like rare commodities. She spoke of her home world, a planet of vast oceans and floating cities, and the sun she hadn't seen in 7 years. A boy who would now be approaching manhood, who might not even remember her face. He has my eyes, she said once, her voice softening as it rarely did. The exact same shade of blue. When he was small, he used to say we had stolen pieces of the sky. Jax, in turn, spoke of his military service, of the cold logic of command that saw people as acceptable losses, of the mission that had finally broken his faith in the system he served. They called it strategic sanitization, he said, his voice hollow as he calibrated a sensor array. A colony of 50,000, just erased, because they were in the wrong place, knew the wrong things. I was supposed to command the unit that secured the area. I refused. My crew refused with me. What happened to them? Lyra asked. Jax's hand stilled on his work. They believed in me. I got them killed anyway. We are both cogs from broken machines, Lyra observed one night, watching him expertly rewire a data jammer. Her slender fingers traced a scar on her wrist, a remnant from the early days of her captivity when she had fought back. The difference, Jax replied without looking up, is that cogs can be replaced. We can choose to be the wrench that breaks the machine entirely. But Kale was a beast, not a fool. He felt his power slipping, his control fraying. The accidents were too frequent, too precise. His paranoia grew, and with it, his cruelty. The next day, during the station's artificial evening cycle, Cal strode into the common area where off-duty workers gathered. His face was a mask of controlled fury as he dragged a young maintenance technician by the collar. A boy no older than 17, his face bruised and bloodied. "This," Kyle announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent space, "is what happens to thieves on my station." The boy struggled weakly. "I didn't steal anything. I was just..." Kale's reinforced fist connected with the boy's jaw, silencing him. You were seen near my private hangar. 3 power cells are missing. The punishment for theft is simple. He activated his replacement gauntlet, a cruder, more brutal model than the one Jax had destroyed. 1 finger for each item stolen. The crowd watched in horror as Kale forced the boy's hand flat against a metal table. The gauntlet hummed with deadly energy. Stop! A woman pushed through the crowd. Sarah, the surgeon, one of Kale's 12, her medical bag clutched in her hands. He's telling the truth. I sent him to the hangar. Kale turned his attention to her, his organic eye narrowing dangerously. You what? A supply runner was injured. Severe plasma burns. He needed immediate attention, but I couldn't leave my post without your permission. Her voice was steady, professional. I sent the boy to retrieve medical supplies from my emergency kit in the hangar's medical station. You gave orders without my consent? Kale's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. I saved a man's life, Sarah replied, her chin lifting slightly. As I am trained to do. The blow came without warning. Kyle's gauntleted fist catching her across the face, sending her sprawling. Blood pooled beneath her as she struggled to rise. The next time you act without my approval, Kyle said conversationally, as if discussing the station's recycling schedule, I'll remove your hands. What use is a surgeon without hands? He turned to the gathered crowd. Let this be a lesson. There is only one authority on this station. As he strode away, dragging the boy with him, Jax caught Lyra's eye across the room. In that moment, a silent agreement passed between them. Their timeline had just accelerated. When Tila reported this to the others gathered in Jax's workshop, the mood shifted from determination to fear. He's bringing in syndicate specialists, Zia whispered, her voice tight with anxiety. I heard it when I was running diagnostics on his shuttle. A full security team with neural scanners. They arrive in 2 days. Neural scanners? Nara, the weapons expert, tensed. Those can detect intention, lies. They'll know as soon as they scan us. And the syndicate doesn't waste damaged property, Lyra added grimly. They'll execute all of us as an example. There's more, Alara said, her analytical voice cutting through the rising panic. Kyle has arranged to sell May to another syndicate captain. Her transfer is scheduled for tomorrow, before the security team arrives. He's breaking up our group. The implications were clear. Once separated, they would lose any chance of coordinated action. Their rebellion would die before it truly began. Ilara, if you would, Jax's voice cut through the rising panic. Time frame? The strategist's eyes unfocused slightly, calculating. 48 hours before they dock. Another 6 before they can set up the equipment. Maybe less. Then we have 48 hours to break the cage, Jax said, his eyes meeting Lyra's across the crowded workshop. We move tonight. Ilara, the strategist, nodded in agreement. Unlike the others, she had come to Kale willingly, a calculated surrender to save her entire planetary defense grid from syndicate sabotage. She was older than the others, with silver streaking her dark hair and eyes that seemed to see 3 moves ahead in any conversation. If we're accelerating, we need contingencies, she said, unfolding a hand-drawn map of the station's lower levels. Kale will expect direct confrontation. He understands brute force. What he won't anticipate is simultaneous, coordinated points of failure. Ilara's analytical mind had made her invaluable in their planning sessions. She thought in the systems and weaknesses, in probabilities and leverage points. Every power structure has its foundation, she often said. Find it and the entire edifice crumbles. The first phase of the plan went smoothly, perhaps too smoothly. Lyra and Jax moved through the maintenance tunnels toward the station's primary communications array. If they could disable it, Kale wouldn't be able to contact the incoming syndicate ship, buying them precious hours. Left at the next junction, Lyra whispered, her natural navigator's instinct guiding them through the labyrinthine passages. The access panel should be... The sudden blare of an alarm cut her off. Red emergency lights bathed the narrow tunnel in crimson. Security breach in Sector 7, an automated voice announced. Initiating containment protocols. Metal blast doors slammed shut ahead and behind them, the sound reverberating through the confined space. They were trapped in a 10-meter section of tunnel, barely wide enough for one person to stand comfortably. That's not possible, Jax muttered, moving to the nearest panel and prying it open. This system isn't even connected to the main security grid. Lyra pressed her back against the wall, her breathing carefully controlled. Unless someone connected it. Unless someone knew we were coming. The implication hung between them in the stale air. A traitor, one of the 12. No, Jack said firmly, his fingers working to bypass the security lockout. They wouldn't. Not after everything. You don't know what 7 years of captivity does to a person, Lyra said, her voice tight. What people will do when their family's threatened. What deals they might make. Jax's hands stilled on the wires. He turned to look at her, their faces inches apart in the narrow space. Do you believe that? That one of you would betray the others? The red light cast strange shadows across her blue skin, making the intricate patterns there seem to shift and flow like blood and water. I want to say no, she whispered, but I've seen what fear can do, even to the strongest people. Jax was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out, his calloused hand finding hers in the dimness. If there is a traitor, then we're already dead. So we might as well act as if there isn't. He turned back to the panel. Besides, there's another explanation. This wasn't a security alert. It was a system failure. Look. He pointed to a cluster of frayed wires. Coolant leak from the upper level. It triggered the emergency containment. A coincidence? Lyra asked, skepticism evident in her voice. No, Jax replied, a faint smile touching his lips. A sign that this station is falling apart. Just like Kale's control. Now help me crosswire these circuits. We need to be out of here before the maintenance crew arrives. As they worked side by side in the confined space, something shifted between them. A deepening of trust, forged in a moment of doubt and reaffirmed by choice. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The summons came unexpectedly. Kale called all 12 specialists and Jax to his personal armory, a cavernous chamber filled with enough firepower to start a small war. The massive blast doors hissed shut behind them with the finality of a tomb ceiling. Cal stood before them, his ruined hand replaced with a gleaming, multi-pronged prosthetic that clicked and whirred as he flexed it. His organic eye was bloodshot from stimulants, while his cybernetic one pulsed an angry red. His face was a mask of cold fury barely contained. My associates in the syndicate have grown displeased, Cal snarled, his voice echoing off the metal walls. They believe I have lost control of my assets. His eyes scanned the faces of the women, settling on Lyra with unnerving focus. And I have found the source of the infection. Guards emerged from the shadows, their rifles raised. 6 of them wearing the faceless helmets and body armor of syndicate enforcers. It wasn't just a confrontation. It was a trap, an execution. Jax felt rather than saw the women tense around him. Lyra stood closest to him, her body almost imperceptibly angled toward his. Her face betrayed nothing, but he could sense the rapid calculations happening behind her stormy eyes. You're right, Jax said suddenly, his voice calm, cutting through the tension. You did lose control. Days ago. Kyle laughed, the sound bouncing harshly off the walls. Your clever tricks are over, mechanic. You are locked in my kill box. My guards will execute you all, and I'll tell the syndicate you tried to escape. A regrettable but necessary loss of valuable property. Are we? Jack smiled faintly. Anya, if you would. The cryptographer, a slender woman with golden eyes and hands that moved with blinding speed, tapped a sequence on the small device concealed in her sleeve. The armory's lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness, save for the pulsing red of emergency strobes. The locks on the blast doors clicked open. Kale's guards stared in confusion, their helmet sensors struggling to adjust to the sudden change. You think I'd walk into the heart of your operation without a backup plan? Jax's voice echoed in the dark. This isn't your kill box anymore, Kale. It's ours. What followed was a perfectly executed symphony of chaos. It began with May's pollen, released into the ventilation system precisely 18 hours before their planned move. By the time they gathered in Jax's workshop for the final briefing, the spores had already infiltrated the optical implants of every augmented guard on the station. Ilara, the strategist, directed their movements through modified maintenance comms, her voice a calm counterpoint to the rising tension. Tila, 2 guards at your 3 o'clock. Their visual feeds should be degrading by 12% now. Sia, maintenance bot in the East Corridor, needs to be reprogrammed. Nara, weapons locker override, code sequence gamma. Each woman moved with precision born of years of forced expertise. May, the xenobotanist, despite her broken arm, monitored the spread of her creation through the station's environmental sensors. Concentration optimal in sectors 3 through 7. Security hub showing 90% saturation. This gave Zia her opening. Rather than hijacking a drone, she reprogrammed a bulky industrial loading bot, its hydraulic arms normally used for moving cargo. Through a modified maintenance terminal, she rerouted its control signals. Diversion in 3, 2, 1, ... The massive machine suddenly broke from its programmed path, crashing through a security checkpoint with its warning lights flashing and alarm blaring. The guards, their optical implants now degraded by maize pollen, struggled to track its erratic movements as it barreled down the corridor. This distraction allowed Nara to access the weapons lockup. With the guards pursuing the rogue loading bot, she slipped inside and began sabotaging the energy packs of their backup weapons. Not enough to make them fail completely, but enough to ensure their power output would fluctuate unpredictably. Weapons compromised, she reported through her communication, moving to Phase 3. Anya, meanwhile, had positioned herself at a maintenance terminal near the station's central communications hub. The moment the security alert triggered by the loading bot caused the system to switch to backup protocols, she inserted her custom algorithm into the communication array. Data package uploaded. Communications compromised. Lyra, using her knowledge of the station's architecture that she'd memorized during countless navigational calculations, guided them through a labyrinth of service crawl spaces. Left at the junction, mined the exposed conduit, dropped down at the count of 3, and Jax, the mastermind behind their technical strategy, moved through the station's systems like a ghost. He wasn't just destroying, he was rewiring, rerouting, manipulating. Each adjustment precise, each change subtle enough to go unnoticed until it was too late. It wasn't a firefight. It was a hostile system teardown, methodical and precise. 12 specialists turning their forced expertise against their captor, a living demonstration of Jax's philosophy that knowledge would always triumph over brute force. They moved through the darkness like a single organism, each knowing their role without hesitation. When one of Kale's guards emerged from a side corridor, Nara, the weapons expert, moved with liquid grace. A pressure point strike, a twist of the guard's arm, and suddenly she was armed with his rifle. She didn't fire it. The sound would give away their position, but the threat was enough to make him retreat. They fought not with brute force, but with knowledge. Knowledge of the station, its systems, its weaknesses. Knowledge that Jax had painstakingly assembled and shared. Kyle's roar of rage echoed through the corridors as they systematically dismantled his control center. "I will hunt you down. I will peel the skin from your bodies while you watch." But his threats rang hollow in the silence that followed. They had won this round. They cornered Kale in his opulent command center, a stark contrast to the utilitarian design of the rest of the station. Luxuries pillaged from a dozen worlds adorned the space. Rare woods, exotic textiles, artifacts of cultures long extinct. The 12 women formed a semicircle around him, weapons they'd acquired from his own armory now aimed at his heart. Lyra stood at the forefront, her pistol steady, her eyes colder than the void between stars. Kyle looked at them, at the shattered remnants of his power, and laughed, a sound tinged with madness and disbelief. "Go on, kill me," he taunted, blood trickling from a cut above his organic eye. "The Syndicate will hunt you to the edge of the galaxy. Your families will pay the price. Their deaths will be on your hands." His words hung in the air, a toxic cloud threatening to poison their victory. Jax saw the hesitation flicker across Lyra's face, the cruel calculus of their situation reasserting itself. Freedom at the cost of innocent lives. It was an equation with no solution. "No, they won't," Anya the cryptographer said, stepping forward. She held up a data pad, its screen displaying an intricate web of information flows. "While you were busy hunting for saboteurs, I compiled a complete dossier on your activities. Financial records, mission reports, supply requisitions, communications logs." She tapped the screen, splitting it to show a transmission readout. "When you tried to contact Syndicate Command about the rebellion," my algorithm activated, "instead of your distress call, they received a detailed report of your incompetence, your failures, and your misappropriation of Syndicate resources." Another tap, another screen. "They also received the exact coordinates of our families, but not as hostages, as assets you've been hiding from them to build your own power base." Kale's face drained of color. "That's a lie." Of course it is, Anya agreed, her golden eyes gleaming with satisfaction. But the evidence I fabricated is flawless. Every transmission, every report, every log entry painstakingly created to tell a single, damning story. Kyle, the ambitious underling planning to break away from the Syndicate. Ilara stepped forward. The Syndicate values loyalty above all else. By now your rivals are already mobilizing to seize your territory and curry favor with command. They'll extract our families not to punish them, but to rescue them from your control. And in the chaos, Lyra added, our people will simply disappear. New identities, new locations, untraceable. She looked at Kale with something approaching pity. You never understood what you had, did you? 12 of the most brilliant minds in the sector, and you used us as ornaments. Kyle's face fell, the brutal truth of his defeat finally sinking in. The power he had wielded so carelessly had been turned against him with surgical precision. He wasn't being eliminated. He was being discredited, dismantled by the very system he served. Physical strength, the one thing he valued, was meaningless against this invisible assault on his position. He stared at Lyra, who held his life in her hands, her fingers steady on the trigger. The moment stretched, taut as a wire about to snap. This was it, the justice she had craved for 7 long years. We're not him, Lyra, Jack said softly from the doorway, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of a shared understanding. Lyra looked from Kale's terrified face to Jax's weary one. 7 years of captivity. 7 years of rage and helplessness and plans for vengeance. 7 years of imagining this moment. And now that it was here, she found it hollow. She lowered the pistol. No, she said, her voice steady. We're not. She ejected the power cell and let the weapon clatter to the floor. They left him there, alive but broken, for the Syndicate's rivals to find. A symbol of how completely his power had been dismantled by knowledge rather than force. In the aftermath, as the news of Kale's fall sent shockwaves through the station, the 12 women gathered in Jax's workshop. The space seemed smaller with all of them present, but somehow warmer. A sanctuary transformed into a command center. Reports filtered in from across the sector. The Syndicate was in disarray, its rivals circling like predators scenting blood. They were free. Their families were being liberated by opportunistic rivals eager to weaken the Syndicate, exactly as Anya had predicted. It was a victory beyond what any of them had dared to hope for. He is no longer our master, Ilara the strategist said, her voice filled with a new, quiet strength. She looked at Jax, her gaze direct and unwavering. Now you are. The other women nodded in agreement. They looked at him with respect, with loyalty, with a trust that had been forged in the crucible of their shared struggle. Jax shook his head, a genuine tired smile touching his lips for the first time. No. He picked up a broken regulator from his workbench, his fingers already probing its damaged circuits, identifying what needed to be repaired. As he worked, his voice was soft but clear. I don't lead. I fix what's broken. The regulator hummed to life under his skilled hands, its indicator lights blinking in a steady rhythm. He placed it gently back on the workbench and looked up at the women who had risked everything for freedom. You were broken, he said. Now you're whole. Now you build something new. His eyes found Lyra's across the crowded workshop. In the weeks since their victory, something had shifted between them. A tentative understanding, a shared language of glances and half smiles. It was too fragile to name, too new to acknowledge. But it was there, like a seed taking root in soil long thought barren. From now on, he said, his gaze encompassing all 12 women, you are your own masters. The Crossroads Free Company became a legend in the outer sectors, a formidable guild run by 12 brilliant and fiercely independent women who protected trade routes and offered sanctuary to those fleeing the syndicates. Their headquarters was Kale's old command center, refitted and repurposed into a bastion of order in a chaotic sector. Ilara's strategic mind guided their operations. Anya's cryptographic skills kept their communications secure. Zia piloted their flagship with unmatched skill. Each woman brought her specialization to bear, no longer tools of oppression, but architects of their own destiny. And in the heart of it all was the system's most advanced workshop, run by their chief mechanic. A quiet man with a haunted past who, when asked, would simply say he was there to fix things. Some nights after the day's work was done, he and Lyra would stand on the observation deck, watching distant stars through the reinforced glass. Sometimes they spoke of the past, sometimes of the future, but mostly they stood in comfortable silence. Two people who had found, against all odds, a machine worth maintaining. He had spent his life running from a moment of defiance that had cost too much. She had spent her surviving captivity, protecting a hope she'd nearly forgotten how to feel. Together they had created something neither had believed possible. Not redemption exactly, but perhaps its quiet beginning. Jax had finally found a purpose worthy of his skills. Not destruction, but reconstruction. Not a weapon, but a shield. In the vast, cold expanse of space, they had created something warm and alive and growing. They had created home.